and we were all like just on this track together. But it was a daunting task, really, really difficult. I will not say that the post process was swift.
We are back for part two of our two-part series on Vow of Silence, the assassination of Annie Mae. We're here with the docuseries creators, Yvonne, Amy, and Caroline, and we are ready to dive in to part two.
Making a documentary, you find, oh, I have this storyline, now I need to find this, now I need to find this, and getting more people involved in interviews. You produced 4 hours worth of content, but I'm sure there was a lot more that could have been told. Let's talk about, how that story was built.
So the first thing I did was I asked Amy to send me all of the court trial transcripts. I said, send me everything we have tangible, anything we have. So she sent over these massive binders, and these binders had like, really like hundreds and hundreds of pages of transcripts. So I started to read through all of them. And then I created a board, who testified and who basically had talked about, Annie Mae and her story, and then built a timeline. Then I had Amy Rockefeller, our archival producer, send over a drive with all of the archival that we had started to search for. And again, we had raised money through development. So all that archival, I started to transcribe each clip that I had, and it took weeks to do. And color coded our characters to see, do we have enough of Dennis? Do we have enough of Russell? Do we have enough of the movement? Like, what are some of the larger pods that we can build out in terms of where Annie Mae was? And then you just start to like, I started to mind map it. So it was like, okay, Dennis was here, and then I'm comparing it to transcripts. It was here. And so you start to piece together everything. So that was like, that's the way that I had started off within my process of this.
I think that there was a plan to sort of go through her story as if you were like sitting next to her on the ride. Once we had that sort of structure, those bones, to go back to what Yvonne said, then it became a task of sort of knowing what we wanted the story to be, understanding what it was through our own investigation, and then going about the process of trying to secure the subject matters who, as Yvonne said, were there, could speak about things in first person, and that we could interview in a way that they would, tell us they're part of the story.
It was really important, as both Yvonne and Amy have said, like, not just to be a victim. The victim story has sort of dominated. And so you can't really care unless you sort of invest. If she's the spirit of the movement, you needed to kind of celebrate that in the first episode, 2 episodes, to see like how necessary the work they were doing was. She represents sort of the best of what that movement was trying to achieve. And so trying to kind of live in that world, but with very few resources. I mean, we've all worked on projects about women in history. They're not often the one with the microphone or at the press conference, which is the thing that's being documented. And so the kind of behind the scenes stuff doesn't get documented as much, and women just weren't documented as much. So trying to build her out without a huge amount of material, and that's where we found that one recording of her voice, which is so amazing, and the letters, which we then Yvonne was keen always to, again, in the name of bringing her to life, embodying her, and having these kind of recreations, but in a fairly, spare and elegant way, because that's always challenging too, when you have like photos of the real person and then you have an actor in a recreation, so trying to marry those is tricky. So Yvonne always knew we needed to do the recreation elements to really fully embody her. And I think they were successful, and I think they turned out really well, and we're pleased with that. And I think it helped a lot. So yeah, figuring out how to bring someone to life who doesn't have a ton of documentation is a challenge, but it's also a kind of creative, fun challenge too, right? Which forces creativity.
It's a puzzle.
Yeah.
And I find with these puzzles, oftentimes the things that in small moments make you sad, that you don't have something that you really, really want, that forces you to find something that turns out to be even better.
In addition to all of the recreations that you had to film all around this country, you also had to find an incredible voice artist that represented Annie Mae. Can you talk to us about that process?
Obviously we knew we needed an Indigenous actress, but at the same time wanted to remain open to maybe those that are unknown. And we wanted to look all over, like wherever we could, to find this person, because Annie Mae has a certain, it's a dialect that she speaks with, and it's a small one, but it makes a big difference. And we were fortunate enough to hire Angelique Midthunder casting and Tara Mazuka, who worked a lot in the indigenous spaces. And so they came on board and really searched far and wide. And we were fortunate enough to find Meg Martin, who is Akwesasne. She's from Akwesasne, New York. She carried Annie Mae's essence, and our auditions that we had with her were actually on Zoom. But there were moments where she would stand just like Annie Mae. She would, kind of move her hip a certain way, just like Annie Mae. And then she just had that like internal toughness without trying. She was just like strong. And I was like, oh my God, I love this girl. And then Amy and Caroline were like, oh my God, like listen to her voice. And her voice was like, she just had it. She had Annie Mae's tone. And we were like, wow, like this
Giving
is
me
so
chills, Yvonne.
yeah, like it was just
Was kind
perfect.
of crazy.
Yeah,
Right.
and she's a filmmaker herself, which is really exciting. So she kind of understood, these nuances that we're capturing. But she was just incredible. So we got really fortunate, with finding Meg Martin.
So the other thing about her is she's a student, she's also an activist. I
Right.
think she felt a very strong connection to Annie Mae, and I think that really guided her.
Yeah, she had like in her audition, didn't she? She had like bell bottoms and like a jean jacket on or something, and she like did this thing, and we were like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Obviously, the music is really important to supporting the story. So what was that process like?
Yeah, this haunting motif.
We hired Robert Mirabel, who is a musical genius. I mean, he's been around the Native community for some time. He's from Taos, New Mexico. He has been a performer and artist for decades. He was somebody I knew who wanted to be in this space, so you have a little bit of those elements of like a kind of like a rock and roll bluesy sort of feel, but at the same time adding in a dimension that had native undertones without being like over the top native, and also a spiritual quality to it. It was hard at first, actually, because our cuts kept on changing and changing and changing. So we would say, like, send us some emotive moments for, when the body was found, or send us something when we're going on to the investigation. So we would give him scenes to work with, and then he would in turn send them back to us. And then we'd have a sort of like a first pass template.
Heavily archival films are really important because you have hundreds of sources. So in order to give it cohesion, the score does a huge amount of work to make this all feel like of one piece, even though you've got 100 different pieces of footage on different formats and different time periods, So the score is like extra important, I think, on heavily archival films. It was just this unique combination. And it's interesting because these systems are not set up for collectives, I just think it became this great blend. True crime thing is also like such a genre for music. And so trying to not just fall into all the tropes of that was
Totally
important.
Even though it is a true crime, like it had such a creative feel to it. So, I feel like it kind of, you guys set yourselves apart. A recurring theme that I've noticed is just, we wanted to do it this way. And so we stood by this choice and we fought for it, I think is very notable and something to really pay attention for our listeners.
Have you guys talked to any of the members that were part of the story, and like what's their reception? Have they seen this?
Favorable responses, which has been great. Yeah, I mean, we all have received text and emails and phone calls, and we had a screening in Los Angeles for episode 1 at the Skins Fest, and a lot of community members came out, and Mathelane White Bear was there, and other movement members were there,
Wonderful.
and they were blown away. they just said, wow, I can't believe like you captured that time and you brought back so many memories. And this is really important for future generations. I had young people come up to me and say, my uncle would tell me stories about this, but I've never seen it. We've had teachers respond already. One teacher reached out to me and said, she showed episode 1 and 2 in her classroom already.
I will say that I also had a chance to go out and screen it for Margot, who was an advisor on the project, Margot Thunderbird. And I have to say, I was nervous to show it to her because, as she says in the film, she's American Indian Movement for life. Annie Mae was a friend of hers. The story is very, very complicated for her. It's one that she, by her own admission, has sort of repressed and not wanted to dig into. And watching her watch this series and say that we did a great job and that she had never seen half of this archival footage, and she wanted people on the Shinnecock Nation to see it. And when I said, well, how do you feel that people are going to respond to this? This is a story that a lot of people have struggled with. And she said, well, I don't know what they're going to say. You've got the footage.
Like, it's sort of a decision you have to make as producers and director. Like, if you want to show people before it hits the airwaves, right? So that they are prepared for whatever's coming, that they have time to process it privately. And not every filmmaker does that, because you also, there's reasons you might want to do it and there's reasons you might not want to do it, and so that's something that we did show several of our key people the film before we delivered it, just because we wanted to make sure that they felt they were represented well. So that's something that is sort of a decision you make, I guess, as producers on a project.
And we all went to go see Denise too. We showed Denise. Her whole
that, and Denise was obviously
Amy
the first
Caroline.
person. Yeah. With three of us went up to Nova Scotia to sit with her and in her own home, in her space.
Right. Which is basically Denise watching the show and the three of us staring at Denise while Denise was watching the show.
I know. It's so it's really nerve-wracking, that's for sure. You're just tense the whole time because you don't know how they're going to react. But yeah, we got very lucky.
But it's generally better to be there, because then if people do have questions, you can answer them right away so that nobody stews in their, worries or stress, And
that's a nuance of making a docuseries or a documentary that filmmakers have to consider, just the impact on the subjects. And, how did that play in? Was that ever like wildly concerning? Obviously you cultivated this on a huge amount of trust.
We're all really responsible filmmakers and making sure that the proper people were the ones speaking to the time. And there's some that are controversial, but that's par for the course. They're sharing their story, and you have to respect and trust that what they're sharing with you is correct.
Right.
And you always still you're always thinking. So
there was an interesting element. I know that you came across new information, and I thought it was so interesting. And I wanted to ask you about how that impacted your process as filmmakers and, what that experience was like.
We have to remain anonymous in terms of the source, but we had an opportunity also to unearth some information.
So as you alluded to, the production figured out, was told where we could look to get a box of discovery and evidence that was used in the trials that some of our characters actually had thought had been destroyed. And many people had heard about or read transcripts from, but no one had this box. So we got one day a sizable brown box taped together. And the funny thing was that people now are used to having everything digitized. So I remember we had it in the office, and a lot of the young people in the office were like, what is this? It's a floppy disk. What is that? That's
it's a micro cassette.
Micro cassette. And so we went and we got it all digitized. I will say that really validated that we can tell this story.
And for me personally, it was actually, I felt like I was intruding. Like it was so weird because it was like, oh my God, like I'm listening to somebody that I know, or somebody that I, directly connected to talk about something that happened or, and it was scary because you feel you're so close to it. And the hardest part was deciding what part of that material you're able to put in that makes sense to all of us. And also continuing to learn, like, because there was so much and there were so many people that were actively involved. And that was really, really shocking.
So for me, it was like someone had a curtain and pulled it back, and I was allowed to go into a room and hear multiple women who were there talking about not just the plot, validating the plot of what we thought had happened, answering a lot of really hard questions, but really giving a sense of what life was like. What was life? It was very raw, very uncensored. And it really gave us a lot of clues to some of, I think, the bigger themes that we were getting at. And so I will, just say in sum that it was, again, validating in terms of on an investigative level that we were on the right track, that what we were proposing was sound. And then it just gave us all of that muscle to work with in terms of who these women were, what their hopes were, why they joined the movement, what their fears were, and where things started to go a little pear-shaped, them speaking a lot about that, which was super helpful. I don't know if Caroline, you want to add anything about the box?
I think it's just an example, just as you're making choices in the edit room and stuff, that's material that's really tangible that you have to build on. So I think it was just something that dictated, certain editorial choices because we had that material, which happens with archival projects, right? You think you're going to do it this way. And then, I mean, up until the last minute, we were finding material. Like our archival producer called us, we were somewhere, I think we were in Nova Scotia, and she was like, I found Stonehorse in the footage. And it's like, he's one of the guys climbing the mast of the Mayflower, leading the protest. Literally, we had like locked picture at that point and we found that footage, so that stuff. So the things keep evolving because you keep finding things.
I want to talk about post. I'm a post freak. That's my background.
God bless you.
I mean, I can't imagine being on this project. Like I literally can't. Which is why you needed so many editors. I totally get it. But was it like a rolling process? And how long did post take overall?
2 years of post. We were tasked with delivering 4 episodes within 1 year while we are still in production. And we knew, that was going to be really challenging. I was hypersensitive in the process because, again, we're representing our community and people. And so it was being extremely mindful of every word that is being said within this. And we were doing all of this actually remotely too. So it was difficult. So we had multiple editors that were working remotely, and then we would use Frame.io, and cuts were being sent back and forth. But the post process was really, I learned a lot on this project. It was very expansive, in terms of all the materials we had and everything that was ingested and how to parcel it out. And it takes time. That's one thing that we all learned is it just takes time, because even if you have a timeline and you're a very loose script, within few hours it's all going to change and you just can't catch up, and then you're finding more materials and you're layering and you're trying to layer, and it just you have to find the emotional bridges to get you from one purpose of the scene to the next. And then something's not working because it's too much context and you don't want a history lesson. And then you need to be entertaining because you have to remember this is Annie Mae's story and you can't segue too far off this path. And one thing changes here. How's it going to change this? So it was a massive amount of work. And we were all like just on this track together. But it was a daunting task. Really, really difficult. I will not say that the post process was swift.
Stories are made in post. They're made in the editing room. I think all of our editors contributed different things, but Mark Becker, who in the end served as a co-producer and as a supervising editor, really was super passionate and super patient and incredible with story, and really helped us because, there's the story that you want to tell, and then there's a story that you can tell with the materials that you have, because I would be looking for stuff and then he'd be like, well, they don't say it the way that you think, or it doesn't come across that way, or you don't. So I just definitely feel that Mark Becker on this project is one of the many heroes of this project for his work and his storytelling and his patience. And
it's hard because it's like, is it one long film that's actually just broken up? Is it episodic? Are obviously the networks want big cliffhangers to make, keeping people watching a series is a really hard thing to do. So I think, having someone who can be the kind of filter so that Yvonne isn't talking to five people, it's like, it's hard as a director also, right? To have five different people you're talking to. So to have Mark as a sort of lead in that way, I think was pretty important.
I do also want to say that we had an incredible supervisor, Dana Henty, literally looked at every day with sort of a militaristic supervision of, what needs to be done and who's working on what. And then, oh my goodness, we can't forget about the effects and this and that. So
graphics, so many headlines and newspapers and photos that we really needed to bring to life. And so she was sort of like feeding stuff to the graphics person and feeding scenes to the composer and feeding, she was like,
managing a team
central station.
Managing a team that was largely remote. So I don't think you could make it through a project like this without a very, very well seasoned post supervisor.
That is something also that I think that role has increased in its need and importance and essentialness on a project. I mean, I had projects 20 years ago that I was like, oh, I'll be the post super, because it was still tapes. And it was, I have to bring a box of tapes to the online or whatever, and so it's like, I can do that. But now the level of sort of, because everything's digital, everything is on a drive and everything, nothing is like a hard piece of media anymore. There's so much technical knowledge required that it's so beyond anything. I mean, I used to get on the Avid all the time and do stuff 20 years ago, but I can't, now it's just like the level of complexity is a whole other thing. And the kinds of deliverables that networks require now are just like epic.
Carolyn, you'd probably know better than me what's typical on one of these projects, but I can say that on this project, we had over 5,000 assets that we were working with across audio and documents and footage. It was just incredible amount of material in various states to be managed.
A lot of it was on film, and then we shot Super 8 also. The Archival was, and there was one or two big important sources that came to us kind of in master form pretty early on. So that actually did take up a fair amount of space.
Okay.
Like in its high res form.
Good. You got that.
So, which was good. Yeah, no, but it took up a lot of space.
I did have one last question for our listeners. If you have one piece of advice that you could give them for if they're interested in starting a documentary that they're really passionate about, what would you say would be the best thing to remember?
I'm going to say something that's been said a million times before, which is just surround yourself with the best people you can.
And I'll say just do it, but also there's not one way to do it. That you have to find your own unique path forward. Some people have luxury to have, the financing to get started. Others don't. But you do have digital now, and you could pick up even your phone and start to do the groundwork and research. And you have all assets online now. There's so many tools. So I think you just have to do it. Do it and then be committed to the long haul. People who make documentaries quickly, like within the year is pretty fascinating to me. It's like, I don't know, maybe I'm the turtle here, but you do need to bake in time to think, because sometimes you have to take a step back in order to like listen to your own voice to understand how you want to tell a story, and then be open to the evolution of story, because it's always going to change. And that's the magic, and believe in that magic and that space between the actuality of doing it and the thinking of it, and open to the unknown and watch it unfold. So you just have to trust yourself.
I guess I would say, just research, do your research, just like read everything you can, pick up the phone and call people and talk to people. It gives you confidence, to just feel like you did your homework. So I think you just can't ever stop keeping reading, keeping talking to people, keeping just, do your research.
Well, thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure. We wish you the best of luck with the series, and keep
Whatever's next.
Yeah, whatever's next. Keep us
Yeah.
posted.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well-
I was in tears at the end. I really was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, it was really moving. The last
Thank you.
episode, the last 20 minutes, and the closure that hopefully Annie Mae's daughter received. So yeah, it's beautiful.
I was thinking about it for days. That's always the mark of a great project. You watch something and you're like, and you're on to the next, I'm going to get groceries. And this just stayed with me. It stayed with me for days, and, still thinking about it.
No, but thank you for saying that. And it's very meaningful for us. I mean, we did all put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. And so to have people, watch it and really smartly engage with it and ask such good questions is really, really meaningful for us. So thank you.
The name of the project is Vow of Silence, The Assassination of Annie Mae. It's on Hulu, and it will premiere on Disney Plus December 11th in Canada.
In Canada and in Europe.
And just to add that it was made by our amazing collaborators at Onyx Collective.
I love these ladies. I'm so happy that we got to meet them and talk to them about their process.
Them being such a succinct team enabled them to just take on this massive project. The stats they gave us about all of the archival information and footage, and it was just staggering. Like, I couldn't believe how much information they had to go through and put the pieces of the story together.
If you're interested in learning more about 101, check out our website, www.101podcast.com.
Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, all at 101 Podcast.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.